My dad is really, really good at what he does. He's probably the best in this part of the world. He's in the Auctioneers Hall of Fame. I mean,
is he really?
He is. My dad's an impressive man, and I learned everything. I rode around with him. I listened. I didn't talk. I listened to everything he said, everything he did, because he knew what he was doing.
From how old? How old were you?
I started traveling with him when I was 10 years old. Wow. I'd go and put up auction signs, or I'd go to auctions, and I would just listen, and I would ride with him. And when I was 12 years old, I flew with him up to Collinsville, Illinois to sell a big industrial building. And I'll never forget, it was 1980, I think, 80, 81, whatever. And the guys that bought the building, they borrowed the money. And I'll never forget, on the way home, Dad said, son, those guys just paid 21% interest to borrow that money. I said, what does that mean? He said, for every $100 they borrowed, they got to pay $21 rent a year to borrow that money. Or they're paying the bank $21 a year for every 100 they borrow, or $21 a year. And I was like, he said that's extremely high interest. That means that it costs you a lot to borrow money. When money's high, when it's cost a lot to borrow money, it slows things down. And I learned that when I was, in 1980, 1981. Wow. And he knew what he was talking about. And I was blessed to learn from him, because he was really good.
So you sat in the car for 10 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, and just listening and asking questions when it was appropriate?
Always. I knew the look. I knew when not to say anything.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story. Yeah. When I was in college, my dad and my uncle and these guys were buying a tract of land. And they were buying it from a big timber company. So I was in college, and I was pretty sure I knew what I was doing. And you know what I'm talking about,
I know
Coach.
Exactly
you know exactly where I am.
About.
So
yeah.
we got this meeting. We're in a high-rise building in Atlanta, and we're at this big lawyer's office, and this big glass, fancy. I mean, I'm in there in a coat and tie, and these lawyers start kind of jerking us around. I'm like, hey, let me tell you something. We're not a bunch of hillbillies from Rome, Georgia. Don't you talk to us this way. And everybody just looks over at me. And I'm like, yeah. And I sat down, and everybody kind of looked at me like, what? And they went back to business. And so Dad doesn't say a word. And my dad, he was just very matter of fact. There was no beating around the bush. So we get in the car to go home, and I said, hey, by the way, I took care of that, Dad. He sat there a minute. He said, son, he said, sometimes, or most times, no, all the time, it's better to sit at the table and let them think you're an idiot than open your mouth and prove them right. And you did a great job of that, son.
Great job.
And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I didn't say another word the rest of the way right home. But he was right. Yeah. Sit there and just be quiet. One mouth, two ears.